Dr. Wiedenfeld here to talk about Hollywood during the period 1945 to 1960, roughly, often called the post-war era, meaning post-World War II, which finished in 1945. General themes for this era are international dominance, both of the US and of Hollywood, but the studio system declines for reasons that I'm going to go over. And I'm going to get at those reasons by talking about 6 key films from that era. Now, first, before we talk about what's changed, let's talk about where we're coming from. So, in the previous period, you had the studio system and a golden age of it because they controlled the whole business. It's an oligopoly, like oligarchy, except it's like a monopoly that controls everything, except rather than one company, there's a handful of companies that are conspiring or collaborating together to run things, run the show. And there's the big five: Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO during this period. And what made them so powerful was not just that they were making all the films, but that they owned the best theaters in the country. So Paramount owned the most theaters. Here's an example of one of their picture palaces in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Paramount Theater. And these are called first run theaters because these companies make the best movies. They show the best movies first in their own theaters for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then later they'll go to second and third run theaters further out in the outskirts that make less money. So this helps them make all the money and control what gets shown in the market. So that was Brooklyn. Here's the Loews in Toronto, and you'll see on the marquee there, Metro Goldwyn Mayer presents. Loews is the big company that owns MGM, or that they're part of the same company. Loews was actually around doing vaudeville and theater before the movies came about, but so those, the big five, they own theater chains. The little three, if I remember correctly, do not. They don't have their own theaters, but they're big enough that they can distribute to a bunch of theaters around, and some of the main theaters, more independent theaters, but the big theaters, they'll have agreements with these little three as well. And then besides that's the main studio system, the big five and the little three. Then you have a poverty row of independents who are making smaller budget movies, and part of the reason they're smaller budget, they can't get them into the big theaters, and it's mostly B movies. Okay, so coming out of the war, the Allies, which are the Soviets, and the U.S., France, Britain, Germany, and and everyone else, they are victorious, and the U.S. is especially in good shape. But now, why does the studio system decline? So the first film that I'm going to talk about gives us first clear sense. This is a Douglas Sirk movie from 1955 called All That Heaven Allows. It's a melodrama. As a genre, especially for the studios saw it as marketed to women. It takes place in interiors, lots of dialogue. And what this image from the film is telling you is it's a story about a widow in a little town in New England, and falls in love with her gardener, played by Rock Hudson. So here you have the gardener out front. This is a picture of suburban life. It's the suburbs that really took off after 1945. People came home from the war, they had lots of kids, and there's all kinds of economic development with real estate. And so people move out to the suburbs, and that's away from where the movie theaters are. All those big first-run theaters and the whole culture of going to movies was about downtown. People would go multiple times a week. When they go to the suburbs, then it shifts to radio and then television by the end of the 50s. everybody is watching TV, and they're only they're going to the movies less frequently. Which so to go to the movies have to offer something special that TV and radio don't. And so you see here color. So back in the 30s, a melodrama, this is not a big musical that would be done in color, or a special historical epic like Gone with the Wind. Usually this kind of story would be done in black and white, but now color is a specific draw, and Douglas Sirk is known for putting a lot of meaning in the story, into the color. And there's also here's another picture from the film, that there's a certain discontent over suburban life, over conventional kind of existence here, and this is the whole conflict for a upper class woman who falls in love with a working class gardener. You see from this dark interior shot here that the color is really representing, you could say in the most simple way, is representing her sadness. There's a sense of passion in the background from the fireplace, and look, the lurking television there, and that's that big box in front of the door, also just a signal of the era. Okay, so I want to take us 1 second aside from films to talk about an important legal decision that happened, and why I stress so much the importance of those first-run theaters. Because there was an antitrust lawsuit that was filed in 1938, and then 10 years later, the last appeal is decided by the Supreme Court against the studios. The studios lose. Paramount was the biggest studio, most theaters, and so they were the first ones listed in the case, and that's why it's known as the Paramount decision. You see here, United States of America versus Paramount Pictures, and then there's all the litigants there on the side, and their attorneys, and you'll see the big five and the little three. So what this meant was that in order to not be a monopoly, the Hollywood studios could not be in exhibition. They had to sell off their theaters. Now, were given quite a runway of 10 more years. It wasn't until about 1959 that they had to finally sell them off, but but they did. And so part of the decline is from the cultural shift and people watching television, and part of the decline is that they lost control over exhibition, and they had to concentrate on distribution. Other picture I want to talk about in this part of the lecture is the Ten Commandments. Huge success, one of the most well-known movies of the time, huge blockbuster. This is a good example of what's known as event cinema, or an event picture. So in this era of suburbs and radio and television, people are only going to go out to the movies when it's something really big, worth seeing on the big screen. And that's what you get here. So also in color, and you may notice that it's widescreen. Widescreen was one of the major developments of the era, and one of the most lasting ones that's still with us. And later on, this is actually why your phone and computer are widescreen, is because in this era, cinema said, we need to offer something that they don't have on the little screen at home. And the television was a ratio of 1.33 to 1. That's the old Academy ratio, the old film standard. So more of a square. And now the new film standard is going to be wider, and there were a whole bunch of different systems and ways of doing this. This one was called VistaVision, and which you see down there at the bottom of the poster. Oh, and I was going to mention at the top of the poster, the greatest event in motion picture history. So this is an event. Well, that's the English poster. Same thing in the Spanish one. Technicolor, VistaVision. and the biblical epic. There were a lot of biblical epics at the time. This was a popular subject going back all the way till the I think 1899. There's a Passion that's done by Pathé in France. And this is drawing the whole family out to the movies. Big special effects, spectacular. That's indicated there by the first one. And big stars, Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner here. The one other thing I want to say about the Ten Commandments that has or had meaning beyond just another Bible story was something that Martin Luther King Jr. said about it in, I don't know if it was a speech or a sermon at the time, and that was that he had seen this movie and he was incredibly moved by its depiction of the struggle that the Jews went through leaving Egypt. This is what the story is about. It's, in a word, the Jewish people are in exile in Egypt, and they're enslaved there. The Pharaoh doesn't want them to go. Pharaoh, played by Yul Brynner. And Charlton Heston, who plays Moses, leads them away from Egypt back to Israel. Now, this is happening at the same time as the state of Israel, or 10 years after the state of Israel is founded, and there's been a war. There's a war in Palestine there, which has been on and off ever since. So that's one background that would have been meaningful for people. But the more interesting one that's less obvious, I think, is the Martin Luther King seeing the struggle of Black Americans for civil rights and emerging from segregation in this kind of second founding moment that he sees in this movie. Which one reason that it isn't obvious is you look at the cast here. Everybody's. The only reason they aren't white as a lily is because they're being depicted as tan. Charlton Heston here, blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jewish man, and then the Egyptian guys here are hardly less Northern European. So that's just a bit of the kind of all-white style at the time to not draw that in. But it's really interesting that King, I think, sees this movie in. He sees beyond that surface and finds another kind of power in it. So I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that if they get a chance to watch it again. Okay, so those are the first two films covering this period. I'm going to do the other parts in the next lecture. But so far, I've talked a little bit about how the U.S. came out of the World War II and then would go into the Cold War as kind of the most dominant nation in the world. Atomic bomb is a big part of that, and Hollywood, benefits internationally from that. A movie like The Ten Commandments is gonna sell abroad very well. The other big reasons for the decline: suburbanization, television, and there's a concentration around event cinema. So it's not an artistic decline, it's an economic decline. Artistically, there might be more kind of masterpiece movies in this period than there was in the last one, because no longer are they making the kind of middle range movies. They're really concentrating, making fewer movies that are more expensive. And of course, the Paramount decision that changed how business was done.